Hello, in this video I'd like to take a look at a New Zealand Pinot Noir, and I've looked at a couple of those recently, but this is a Marlborough Pinot Noir. It's from a producer called Te Whare Ra. It's the 2017 vintage wine from the Clayvin single-vineyard. So Te Whare Ra, quite a small, well-established winery located in the Renwick sub-region of Marlborough, owned by winemakers Anna and Jason Flowerday. The 11 hectares of vineyards have predominantly loam over clay soils, and this is one of the older vineyards planted in Marlborough. It was originally planted in 1979 by Alan and Joyce Hogan, and they were also one of the first producers to open a cellar door to consumers visiting Marlborough. Anna and Jason Flowerday came to Marlborough in 2003, having met in Australia. Anna is originally from the McLaren Vale, whereas Jason grew up in Marlborough. When they purchased the property, they became Te Whare Ra's third owners. Their approach to grape growing is to keep yields low, and they manage the vineyards using a combination of organic practices for which they're certified. They also use regenerative and biodynamic practices. And the fruit here is all hand-picked and very carefully hand-sorted. Wines are made using minimal intervention in a small winery specifically set up to handle small batches. They produce quite a wide range of wines, from aromatic wines such as Gewurztraminer and Riesling. They have Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay. They make a really fascinating aromatic blend that they call Toru. They also make rosé, Pinot Noirs, and Syrah. Now, Te Whare Ra prefer the flavour profiles that come from the southern side of Marlborough, the sub-region referred to as the Southern Valleys or sometimes the Southern Clays. Here, soil types are much older than on the Wirral floodplain. They have lower fertility and a much higher clay content. They're less friable, and this tends to give wines with more depth and structure. Now, the Clayvin Vineyard is really quite interesting. It's probably one of Marlborough's most famous single vineyard sites. It was the first close-planted hillside site to be established in Marlborough. The vineyard was planted in 1991 by somebody called Mike Eaton, and he'd spent time in Burgundy and returned to Marlborough to put some of the things he'd seen there into practice. Clayvin is a 13.4 hectare vineyard located in the Southern Valleys at the end of the Brancott Valley. Evidently, Mike managed to purchase the site quite cheaply from the Hiller family, and not surprisingly, given his time in Burgundy, planted mostly Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. There were, however, budgetary constraints, and probably given the fact that there wasn't much availability of grafted vine stock, Mike initially had to plant with ungrafted vines. The first wines were made from the vineyard in 1994, and unfortunately that's also the year that phylloxera struck, and that meant that the entire vineyard almost immediately had to be replanted. Replanting took place in 1997, which means that the oldest vines there are now 30 years old. The financial stress that replanting caused Mike meant that he ended up having to sell the vineyard. And in 1999, a combination of the Swiss winemaker George Fromm and UK wine merchants Lay and Wheeler purchased the vineyard. Now, in around 2008, George Fromm chose to move back to Switzerland and eventually sold his holdings in the Clayvin Vineyard. And unfortunately, from this period onward, being managed by absentee owners, the quality of the vineyard deteriorated fairly noticeably. In 2011 and 2012, Giesen Brothers bought fruit from the vineyard and made Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and this enabled them to see the potential of the vineyard. The wines were quite tight, they took time to open. The fruit was able to achieve good flavour and phenolic ripeness without particularly high alcohol. pHs were low, giving good active acidity, and the quality of the tannins was attractive. Now, the various changes of ownership led to issues with the vineyard. For example, there'd been problems with the irrigation system. So in 2014, Giesen took a 10-year lease on the estate, and they brought in a biodynamics expert, somebody called Kurt Simchich, to restore the vineyard's balance. The following year, in 2015, they were actually able to purchase the vineyard outright and have owned the Clayvin Vineyard ever since. They really quite quickly moved to sort out the vineyard's issues. For example, there was no machinery to cut back the weeds growing under the vines, and in some vines there were weeds growing right up to the fruit zone within the trellising of the vineyard. Today, the entire vineyard is farmed organically, and this is certified by an organisation called BioGrow New Zealand. Clayvin has become a renowned terroir for Pinot Noir, and several producers make wine from the site. Obviously, this includes Giesen Brothers. However, the Fromm winery also still make a wine from Clayvin, as do Te Whare Ra. So it's almost become like a Premier Cru site from Burgundy, where a number of producers will make different expressions from the same site. Te Whare Ra's role here is quite an interesting one, because they actually favour using fruit from a clone called Clone 5, which is an American clone which is seen to produce a lighter, more elegant style of wine, which manages to give a lifted aromatic profile while still retaining some of the depth and richness that Clayvin's clay-dominated soils give the wine. Te Whare Ra have produced their wines from different blocks within the vineyard. Sometimes the fruit will come from block B, sometimes from block D, and sometimes from block G, or a combination of these. And it tends to be some of the other clones grown here, Burgundy clones such as 115, 667, 777, also clones such as Able and 10 Bar 5 tend to produce bigger, richer wines. And that fruit goes to Fromm and Giesen. To talk about the 2017 vintage from Marlborough, evidently the spring in late 2016 brought wet weather which adversely affected flowering and reduced yield somewhat. However, what followed was a textbook summer. It was warm and dry, but without the excesses of heat that had been seen in the previous two vintages. There was very even ripening, and the resulting wines have great concentration and a sort of a fleshiness to them. There are fine, ripe, quite silky tannins. Te Whare Ra picked slightly earlier than usual. This was picked on the 20th of March. And because there was no immediate weather pressure, they were able to pick all the different vineyards at their own pace. So what was harvested was exceptionally healthy fruit, and that managed to come in before some major rain events hit Marlborough just at the end of harvest that year. So all this fruit was hand-picked, the bunches were hand-sorted, it was destemmed, and then the individual berries were sorted again to ensure that only pristine, perfect Pinot Noir berries made their way into the fermenters. The fruit was transferred very gently into 1 ton open fermenters. It was a 6-day cold soak, and hand plunging of the cap of skins into the fermenting must took place twice a day during a fermentation that lasted for about a week. The different lots received between a week and 2 weeks of post-fermentation maceration, and I believe a small percentage of whole bunch fruit was allowed to go into the fermenters. During this period, the wines were tasted and a decision was made on taste as to when to press the wine off the skins. A day later, the wine was moved into oak barrels. These were French oak barriques, and a portion, somewhere between a third and 40% of those were new. The wine underwent its malolactic conversion and aged in barrel for 11 months. 2017 is only Te Whare Ra's second release of a wine made from Clayvin Fruit, and evidently in this vintage they only made 65 cases, whereas more normally I think they would hope to make somewhere in the region of 125 cases. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? I'm looking at the colour, and there's a really quite nice development. It's quite a dark ruby there. There is a sort of a slight bricky note to the colour. As far as the wine's evolution and ability to age, the drinking window that I've seen suggested is from 2021 through to 2026. So I'm expecting this to be a fully mature wine. Certainly the colour's suggesting that. The alcohol is only 13%, and there are some quite noticeable tears forming on the side of the glass quite readily there. Just coming back to the depth of colour there, although the wine is dark, there's only really a medium depth of colour. I've noticed some delicious aromas coming from the glasses I've been speaking, so I'm really quite looking forward to examining them a little more closely. Gosh, that really is fabulous. There's a very exciting set of aromas there. There's a powerful, rich ripeness. There are some notes of over-maturity, almost hints of raisin, prune. There are some developed notes, truffle, but also there's a lovely overlaying bright red fruit, raspberries, mulberries, some real vivacity, and that's somehow being lifted by some Lovely spicy notes. There's cinnamon. There are cedary notes. There's almost a sort of licorice edge, a depth to the aromas. There's a really lovely interplay between some clean, cedary oak, perhaps some vanilla hints, and some really sweet baking spices, cinnamon particularly. That's really exciting. I could spend a lot of time nosing this wine. But let's have a taste. And it really does have some structure to go along with the rich fruit. Slightly grainy tannins are interacting really nicely with the fresh acidity to give a mouth-watering nature to the wine. The bright fruit is expressing itself as rich mulberries, loganberries, and then on the mid-palate you're starting to get some of those developed notes of truffle, forest floor. There is a little bit of warmth from the alcohol, which is beautifully picking out those cinnamon spices that I saw on the nose. And the freshness of the acidity is giving a lovely length to a mid-weight finish. This is a structured, fine, elegant wine. It isn't a huge wine. It has beautifully defined presence, persistence, and elegance. I'm loving the persistence of the spicy red fruit. It's just enduring so well on the finish. While I'll happily agree that this is a wine that is fully mature, I think it probably does have the ability to age for another couple of years. At the same time, I don't think there's any need to wait for it to soften or to develop further. This is a very nice place at the moment. Taking a look at Wine Searcher's aggregated critics score for this vintage of this wine, it comes in at 95 out of 100. And that is a score I have to agree with completely. I think the wine's beautiful, vibrant and exciting. It really is a treat to taste it. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be fantastic if you could press the like button for me. I'd really appreciate that. And if you have any friends you think might also like to watch, do please consider forwarding the video to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. If you are watching my videos and you enjoy them, it would be a real help if you could subscribe to the channel. Building up a number of supporters would really help me to do more to develop the channel. It would also enable you to set an alert to be able to be notified every time I publish a new tasting. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine. And do also please leave your comments, questions or suggestions in the comments box below. It would be great to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for taking the time to join me, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the near future. Until then, bye for now.